and welcome. You're watching Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. I'm Rishika Barua. Ever since Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand have eased their COVID restrictions, people have thronged to the hills. And how? Large crowds have been seen across hill stations. Waterfalls are being seen with large crowds of unmasked people. Traffic jams have returned to highways leading to these hill stations. Now, as people gather in Uttarakhand and Himachal in large numbers, the government has called this revenge tourism. The Prime Minister, at a meeting of Council of Ministers yesterday, has expressed concern and said that there is no space for complacency over COVID. Now, cases in India have been plateauing in the past several weeks, but active cases have risen slightly once again. Now, in the light of that video that you're seeing on your screens from Kempty Falls, and of course these pictures from Manali where large crowds have been seen at marketplaces, there's now a crackdown, at least as far as Kempty Falls is concerned. The latest update that we have is that only 50 tourists will be permitted at a time after this video went viral. Well, will these hill station crowds lead to a third wave? How worrying is this given the fact that we have a rapidly transmissible Delta variant around? Joining us on the broadcast, we have Dr. Arvind Kumar, Chairman, Institute of Chest Surgery, Medanta Hospital. We also have Dr. Rachna Kucheria, an epidemiologist, to make sense of how this impacts the numbers. Dr. Kumar, if I can come to you first, there's been a lot of concern expressed over these visuals that we've been seeing of overcrowding at hill stations. How worried are you when you look at these large crowds of unmasked people?
Thank you, Ruchika. Actually, looking at these visuals, I'm not just worried. I'm actually shocked and amazed that just a month or month and a half after the horror which the whole country has witnessed, how these people can be so callous towards their health and the health of the country at large. The virus has not gone. The virus is very much there. We may be seeing 35,000-40,000 cases a day, but we know that the virus is very much there. In that huge crowd at Kempty Fall, even if one infected person is there, that person can infect at least 50 to 100 people in the course of a day. And those people can then start the chain reaction across the country. And to see it happening just a month after the horror which country has witnessed, yes, I find it absolutely impossible to explain. You name it revenge tourism, you name it whatever you like, but I think this behavior needs to be stopped. And I would go a step further and say that if people start behaving so irresponsibility, it is the duty of the state government, the district administration,
yes,
that in the interest of the nation, these people should be stopped from doing this kind of callous behavior. Rushika, they are not just harming themselves. They actually may be the beginners of the third wave in the country.
Right. Doctor, what you say is extremely worrying because you're potentially calling these super spreader events and saying that what we're seeing on our screen could potentially trigger the third wave of COVID. I want to bring Dr. Rachna Kucheria into the conversation because Dr. Kucheria, one of the reasons why we are seeing these large crowds, despite what we faced in the second wave, is because cases have plateaued. We have seen a steady decline in COVID-19 infections. And that's, perhaps one of the reasons that's emboldened people to, initiate travel to the hills, beat the heat. But how long before we see the ripple effect in terms of the numbers rising again? Explain the maths to us.
Well, I agree with what Dr. Arvind Kumar has just said. And we know also that from the rest of the country, it's not like the virus has gone away. In South India, we are seeing increases. Kerala right now is worrying. Northeast India is seeing a sharp rise. In fact, they may be getting a delayed second wave. And the country is porous. People are going back and forth. And as we've seen now in the hill stations as well, rightly so, if there is one person who's infected, so RT number, for example, in the Northeast right now is over 1. And that means if one person is infected, he could potentially infect 20 to 50 people, and that would then exponentially go up. But all it takes is one infected person, and the rest, if they are susceptible, it could go really fast. So yeah.
But in terms of this delay, can you explain to us? We know that there's always a bit of a gestation period between these incidents of large crowding, whether it was the Kumbh or the political rallies that we saw, which largely were behind fueling the second wave of COVID. What is that gap like? Is it, say, a fortnight, a month before we begin to see cases rising again, and then look back and say that these crowds could be the reason?
Hard to say, also because we now have the Delta variant, which, as we know, is far more contagious. It's hard to say exactly when the next wave will hit.
Right.
But yeah, I would say if this sort of behavior persists, we should be on the alert in the next couple of weeks to a month even. Also, what kind of testing is going on, whether it's at these places where super spreader or crowding events are happening. What is the testing happening? What are the positivity rates you're seeing there? So that kind of focused testing also needs to happen.
Yes.
If people are gathering and defying what is COVID appropriate behavior, and we'll get a sense of what the numbers are over there. And then once it crosses the RT number, the reproduction rate, then it'll be a logarithmic rise. And that's why we have to stay alert to both those things. One, minding people's behavior. Two, continuing to test around places where this sort of behavior is happening, much as we don't want it.
Okay. Dr. Kumar, how worried are you particularly, given the fact that we have the Delta variant now in India, the Delta Plus as well? This is a variant that is several times more transmissible, more infectious than the Alpha variant. We know that it is the Delta variant that caused the second wave. Given the fact that there is such a rapidly transmissible variant, what could these crowds do? What could these pictures potentially mean?
Rushika, these crowds could actually be the beginning of the third wave in the country. As I'm repeatedly saying, the virus is very much there. Numbers are reducing, but the numbers have not hit zero. There is very much large reservoir pool of virus present in the community, number one. Number two, we know that most of it actually is Delta variant, which is a highly contagious, highly transmissible virus. And if this kind of behavior, mixing of crowd occurs, these events will become the beginner of the third wave. And mind you, Rushika, these people are not from Mussoorie only or from Manali or Shimla only. They are there from probably the entire North India.
Of course,
or
of course. These are tourists. Yes, these are tourists.
So these people will go back and they will carry the infection just the way we know that the political rallies and Kumbh and those kind of religious gatherings were responsible for second wave. I think we are repeating what the country did in January and February. And if that continues to happen, the third wave is not far away. You were asking Dr. Kucheria about the time. Trust me, if this kind of behavior continues, you track these people when they go back, and in about 2 to 3 weeks' time, you may start seeing a rise in the number of cases.
Well, you've issued, Dr. Kumar, perhaps the strictest, sternest warning. One sincerely hopes that people are listening, they take your advice seriously, and we also hope that restrictions that were lifted are at least, put back in place so COVID appropriate behavior is followed. We know after that Kempty Falls video, now there are restrictions that have been put in place. Only 50 people are going to be allowed at a time. But what about people not wearing masks? Everywhere you see people roaming around without masks. Indeed, very worrying. Now, as we fear that these crowds on your screens may well lead us to a third wave of COVID, let's shift our focus and take a look at another part of the country which hasn't quite seen an end to the second wave. Of the 73 districts in the country currently that have a positivity rate of over 10%, 47 of these districts are from the northeast. So 1 in 10 COVID tests are coming back positive in Assam, in Meghalaya, in Mizoram, in Nagaland, in Arunachal, Tripura, Manipur and Sikkim. These are 8 states that we're focusing on. 64% of the districts in India with a 10% or higher positivity rate are from these 8 states in the northeastern region. What is happening in the northeast? Let's talk a little more about it. We have Dr. Gayatri Gogoi, researcher and assistant professor from the Assam Medical College, joining us from Dibrugarh. Dr. Kucheria and Dr. Kumar also continue to be live with us. But Dr. Gogoi, if I can come to you first, can you explain what is really happening in the Northeast?
Right. Actually, like other parts of India, Assam numbers are not going down as expected or like the last time in the first wave. We still have around 23,371 active cases. And as of yesterday's test positivity was 2.48%. So we are still in the second wave. So that is one. And maybe one of the reasons is there was no complete lockdown, unlike that happened in all other parts of the country. In Assam, there was no complete lockdown. Only in last 3 days, in 7 districts, there were complete lockdown. As a lot of movement, gatherings, activity, it helps to increase the number, increase the infectivity. That may be one of the cause. And last time it was a complete lockdown.
Yes.
We think that is one cause, and definitely the Delta variant is another probable cause of.
So you're saying, Dr. Gogoi, 2 important points. You're saying the fact that public health measures like lockdowns were not enforced as strictly as they were in the first wave of COVID. That's one of the reasons. And the second reason, of course, that you are in fact saying is that, the rate of infection just hasn't had a chance to dip. There hasn't been any kind of a strict lockdown that has been imposed, which would lead to a fall in infections. But the government has said 2 more things. The government has said, and this is the Union Health Ministry, they've said that the challenging terrain has led to low testing and that it is not easy for ambulances to access remote areas, and this could have further compounded the problem. Do you agree?
Well, Ristika, definitely a complicated issue. In Assam, I must say that numbers of testing, of course, good numbers than many other states of the country. Testing rate is over 1 lakh here. Yes, this time more of the cases are coming from the village, rural area. The numbers of cases less in the town or urban places. That may explain to a certain extent. And definitely administration and government is trying their best. But maybe our demography and inaccessible areas and the type of new strain and some amount of activity has to remain.
Right.
And
once again,
on. That may be one reason.
Once again, Dr. Gogoi, you're also talking about the Delta variant, which is what Dr. Arvind Kumar had also talked about. Dr. Kumar, do you want to come in here? The Northeast just hasn't seen COVID cases going down like the rest of the country. And Dr. Gogoi says 2 reasons. One, of course, lockdown not strictly enforced, and the fact that we do have the Delta variant dominant here in the country.
So, Rushika, Delta variant was dominant in rest of the country also. In Delhi also it was the dominant. Maharashtra it was the dominant. But we did have cases going down because of the strict lockdown. There were people who doubted the value of lockdown last year also, but we saw it was effective. And this year again we have seen there was one event which actually controlled the second wave. It was strict lockdown which was imposed in most part of the country.
Right.
And that's what Northeast has not done. And that's the reason why the cases are continuing to rise, or they have become plateaued, but they are not coming down.
Right.
Unless you stop people-to-people transmission, your numbers will not start coming down.
Okay. Dr. Rachna Kucheria, very quickly comment on the positivity rate. 64% of districts in India today that are reporting a 10% plus positivity rate are from these 8 states in the Northeast.
Right. So, again, piggybacking on some of what has been said before, this is the second wave, which is delayed, which has come now to the Northeast a little delayed. Just like the second wave in the rest of the country started first in the large metros, then went to the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and then rural areas. It is most likely the second wave, which is delayed, which is what we are seeing. The numbers started spiking from end of May, June onwards, and are steadily going up. So they're seeing their second wave. And I do agree that to nip it in the bud, over 10% positivity rate is only going to go up. That's how Delhi started. And then we went up to 25, 30, and over that. to nip it in the bud, they will have to go into lockdown measures.
Okay.
Otherwise, again, there is a risk not just for the Northeast, but coming into the rest of the country as well.
Well, that's again very important points that you're making, essentially saying that the only way to bring down this high positivity rate that we're seeing in these 8 northeastern states is to impose varying degrees of lockdowns based on what individual districts are seeing. There's no other way to really bring down the cases. Thank you so much for joining us on this extremely important conversation. We're going to keep a close watch on those numbers from the Northeast. Meanwhile, shifting focus, Germany has lifted a travel ban from India. Fully vaccinated people won't be quarantined in Germany anymore. Let's go across to Thomas Sparrow of DW joining us from Berlin. Thomas, Germany's changed its travel restrictions for India. What are the main details you can share with us?
India is now on Germany's high incidence list, which is regularly updated by the country's Public Health Institute and refers to countries where there's a particularly high risk of infections. Being on that list essentially means that travellers must now present a negative test result or proof of vaccination prior to departure, as well as observing a 10-day quarantine which they can end halfway after a second negative test. For India, this essentially means that it's no longer on the much stricter virus variant country list, which entails a travel entry ban for all non-German citizens and residents. As well as India, other 4 countries were also reclassified as high incidence areas: Nepal, Russia, Portugal and the United Kingdom.
All right, thanks so much, Thomas Sparrow, for joining us with those updates. So, Germany has lifted the travel ban from India. Fully vaccinated people no longer need to be quarantined in Germany. With that, we're going to slip into a very short break. But coming up next, Dr. Arvind Kumar continues to be live with us. He'll answer your questions on the COVID-19 vaccine. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special campaign, Vaccinate India, in partnership with Google. We're discussing questions you may have about the COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Arvind Kumar continues to be live with us. Dr. Kumar, does the presence of antibodies mean that a person is immune or protected from COVID-19?
Rushika, that's a very interesting question. Yes, presence of antibodies does mean that you have protection. But I would like to qualify this statement by saying that this protection is not absolutely 100%, as we have seen, because the protection is against that particular strain of virus which has been used to vaccinate you. And by chance, if the strain which is circulating at the moment has some changes, mutations, which makes it resistant to these antibodies, then despite having antibodies, you may actually have possibility of acquiring infection, as happened in many vaccinated and previously infected people in the second wave.
But is antibodies the only parameter to gauge your immunity against COVID, given the fact that a lot of people after getting COVID don't get very good antibodies? Neither are people, some people are not even getting an antibody test positive after they've been vaccinated. So what's the parameter to really understand antibodies?
So understanding for the immunity, there are 2 types of immunity. One is the humoral or the antibody based immunity, which we check by checking for our antibody levels. And the other is cell mediated immunity, which is also very important, but is very, very difficult to check because it needs very highly sophisticated tests, which cannot be done in the community setting. Right. So to summarize, the antibodies are the only parameter, but antibodies are not having a direct relationship with the possibility of infection, which means if you have high antibodies does not mean that you are 100% safe. And if you have low antibodies does not mean that vaccine has not worked in you. So to summarize, do get vaccinated. You will be highly protected after vaccination, but COVID appropriate behavior will continue to be needed after vaccination also. These 2 together make you absolutely safe.
All right. So antibodies is the only parameter available to us, but in scientific terms is not the only parameter that determines your immunity to COVID. I think that's a very important clarification, since a lot of people are very worried after they get their antibodies tested and don't think that they're enough. I want to also ask you about mRNA vaccines. Now that the Moderna vaccines got emergency use authorization here in India, how does the mRNA technology work?
So this technology actually presents the template of the virus, the part which actually stimulates the antibody production. So instead of the whole sequence or the whole spike protein part being there, you are presenting that template to the body, and the body produces antibody. And since this antibody is against that part of the virus which is actually antigenic, when the true virus actually arrives, the body recognizes the sequence in the virus and it hits and prevents the infection. So that's how it works.
But which technology is better? Is an mRNA vaccine better than an adenovirus or a viral vector vaccine? How would you explain the difference?
So I don't think it's the technology which makes it better or anything. What we need to see is which one is producing better antibody response, and in clinical trials is giving us higher levels of efficacy. So if you see, the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer as well as Moderna, have given us about 94-95% efficacy, as opposed to 70 to 80% efficacy reported with Covaxin and Covishield. So you are right in saying that these two vaccines have given us a higher rate of efficacy. But that does not mean that as a technology, that thing is better than this thing. Maybe tomorrow some new vector technology will come, vector-based vaccine, which may actually give you an equivalent efficacy rate.
Right. And side effects of mRNA vaccines, are they any different?
So side effects wise also, I think both the vaccines have had quite a safe profile. The mRNA vaccines have had this problem of clotting being reported in some of the cases there, but similar problem has been reported in Covishield also. And if you look back at the history of vaccination, I don't think till date there has been any vaccine developed in the last 50 years which has been 100% side effect free. So you have to accept a small amount of side effect for in lieu of huge benefits which you get from the vaccine. So in one sentence, the message is vaccines are our best protection. Go and get vaccinated ASAP.
On that note, thanks so much, Doctor, for sparing your time and being with us.